Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor and a privilege to be here 50 years on. I was 23 years old, I was 73, so most of my life has been spent in this beautiful country. I'd like to recognize first four people. Peter Duffy, stand up. Eugene Woods and Gilmore Simons, who were on duty on February the 2nd, 1965. Gilmore was awarded the Colonial Police Medal for Meritorious Service by Her Majesty the Queen for his actions that day. I also want to recognize Graham Moore. Graham, stand up. The son of Sergeant Andy Moore and a very prominent member of the Somerset Brigade Band. And this is how it all started. 8:30, February the 2nd morning, junction of Rosemont Avenue and Serpentine Road. Police combi, myself, Inspector Ball, PC Dryburgh, Sergeant McSherry. A car, small car, driven by a white woman, a child, and an employee of Belco wanted to enter the western entrance. The line was shuffling along over the exit area or entrance area. It was obvious that tensions were rising. We were there in ordinary police uniform with police helmets on. There was no riot gear at that time. I was in the middle of the road and the car stopped in front of me. I turned round and beckoned the woman to drive through the gap. As she drove forward, the gap closed and the line remained steadfast. It was then that what I call maybe hangers-on decided to get involved, and I told the vehicle to back up Rosemont Avenue. It was then that things started to get out of hand. And I can remember in the crowd in front of me, Mr. Kenny Paul, and the late, great Samuel Pennington Samuels. It was a frightening moment. 30, 40, 50 people around me. By then, Inspector Ball had gone, he disappeared, and he had been attacked. And I was on my own, frightened to death. I was knocked unconscious, taken or staggered back to the police vehicle, stayed there for about 20 minutes, gained my senses, and then realized there was trouble at the eastern gate. I and others made our way there, and there was Ian Davis on the ground, badly, badly injured. And spare a thought tonight for Ian Davis, awarded the Colonial Police Medal for gallantry for what he did there. So we ended up, in fact, what I would say is that sense started to sink in once the Davis incident had finished. Calmness seemed, not calmness prevailed, but a sense of what on earth's going on overtook many people. There were many people there that were very frightened. There were, hidden behind the low wall, there were weapons, there were golf clubs, there were pieces of wood. And I think a lot of people had arrived at the scene to create trouble. I think that's what really set things alight. We regrouped. By then I was in a bit of trouble with concussion. We went back to Prospect, and I'll finish up on this note. The union members marched to Devonshire Recreation Club, where they held a meeting. And the police were concerned about what was going to happen next. This was in the afternoon. And I can recall very clearly George Robbins, the commissioner, coming to the police traffic unit, standing in a center circle of about 40, 50 policemen and telling us that he thought the crowd was going to march on police headquarters and we might be in real trouble. Sense prevailed at Devonshire Recreation Club. Common sense took charge and things calmed down. But that is the story from, my correct story from what I recall 50 years on. We've come together tonight to praise everyone who took part in it. The Bermuda police were sent there initially totally unprepared for what we had to deal with. And whenever I go past, I told Samuel this, whenever I go past that junction of Rosemont Avenue and Serpentine Road, it's like yesterday. Thank you very much.
My recollection of February the 2nd might be somewhat different because I try to analyze what was it that would cause Belco, the Belco directors, to have the attitude that they had. Why would they not recognize the union? And I understood what the situation was like at that point in time. And it may well be that for many of us, our memories have dimmed because we enjoy so many privileges that we're hard fought for. And when I say our memories have dimmed, I want us to recognize and remember how powerful, how very powerful those directors were. I mean, John did not mention to you that his father had his mortgage called as a consequence of that. And I've heard Audie regale us with a story of, you heard the name John Mello mentioned here tonight. He was the white fellow who joined the union. And when the union met with Belco directors, one of the first questions that was asked of John was, isn't it your father who works over here to do the grounds? The inference was, you mess with us, we could mess with him. But those, I'm looking at Pat now when I remember something else. Pat Gordon Pamplin. I'm looking at Pat Gordon Pamplin as I remember this. You may recall in 1946, Dr. Gordon had a petition sent to the Secretary of State for the Colonists in which he was asking for fair and equitable treatment for Bermudian workers. And the person whom he saw was a man named Arthur Creech Jones, who sent an instruction to the governor by way of a white paper saying that fairer measures should be implemented. That matter was discussed in the House of Assembly in 1947. And when it was discussed, a man whom we later got to know as Sir Henry Tucker said that jurists would agree that when there are irreconcilable differences, a divorce is justified. What he was saying is that the governor should be told to tell the people in the UK to let Bermudians take care of Bermuda's business. He was saying that if London wished to impose its will on Bermuda by having them reform their practices and be more fair, then Bermuda would unilaterally declare independence. It is interesting, the first time I heard of a unilateral declaration of independence was in November the 11th, I think it was 68, when Ian Smith declared independence of Rhodesia. But I digress somewhat. If you did not behave, your mortgage could be called. You could lose your job. You had no prospect of advancement. It was a horrible situation. And I say I was reminded of that because the power brokers in Bermuda had their unbridled power questioned, one in 46 and 47. They had it questioned in 1959 when they had the theater boycott. And remember, when the individuals had the theater boycott, they were anonymous, and they kept their names secret for who knows how long. For how long? 1959 to 1999 is 40 years. So for 40 years, these people didn't say who they were. And they didn't say who they were because they were concerned about the repercussions that they could be expected to be exposed to. Let us also remember what it was like to vote then. In order to vote, you had to have property. So it meant that a person who had gone away and had a university degree but didn't earn property couldn't vote. A real dumbbell whose daddy left him a house cool. And the other thing, I mean, your ability to vote. If you earned a property in 2 or 3 parishes, you could vote in each of those parishes. And I think we would tend to forget a general election took place over 3 days. Why did it take place over 3 days? Because the first Monday, there would be an election in Somerset, Southampton, and Warwick. Tuesday, Paget, Pembroke, and Devonshire. Wednesday, Hamilton, Smiths, and St. George. And the reason was they didn't have motor cars, so they couldn't cover the length and breadth of the island with a horse and buggy easily, particularly if they had to stop at more than one place. So that was to enable those who earned multiple properties to vote in each parish. And sometimes, if your mate didn't earn a property in a particular parish, and your property had a sufficient assessed value, you could give your mate a temporary interest in your property so that both of you can vote. I listened to the reaction, and some of you are surprised, but it was horrible. And I say all that to say this. What we are able to experience today, we have taken it for granted. Because, I mean, if some of the young ladies couldn't have maternity leave, they'd complain. Or vacation pay. How audacious would we have been if we suggested that in those days? So I now realize that I've spoken so long and I haven't said anything about the Belco strike, but I digress. Let me say this. As a police officer, Bermudian police officers were in an awkward situation. We were in an awkward situation because in my personal case, I was a police officer, and on the other side I saw Mr. Kenneth Paul. We both sang in the choir at St. Monica's. No. I mean, trust me, a lot of progress has been made. It's interesting how things occur. Why do I say this? This meeting was opened with a prayer by Reverend Nicholas Tweed, whose father was a BIU stalwart. All right. I'm coming to you now. The closing prayer will be by Bishop Nicholas Deal. And you were related to Sir Bayard Deal, your grandfather, and Sir John Cox was your cousin, was he not? Or it was close to the family anyway. So, I mean, look at that. There was a time when to consider any interaction between us was totally out of the question. And look at how comfortable we could sit together to discuss 50 years ago. The last thing I want to say, because I thought of it earlier, there were at least 4 persons who were convicted as a result of the Belco strike. It is my belief that there is a legal process, and I'm going to look at those of you who exert positions of influence. There is a legal process whereby those convictions could be removed from the record, so that at this stage, 50 years from the date that that occurred, the heads can be held up higher, knowing that their records are unblemished. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I did ask a question a few days ago of my family. Who could ever have imagined 50 years after February the 2nd, 1965, that you'd have 3 ex-policemen sitting up here having a panel discussion? Holy Moses. Excuse me. It's unbelievable, or it was unbelievable. We couldn't have imagined that 50 years ago. So we have come an awful long way, which is a very good thing indeed. And I do want you to know, I got the invitation just fairly recently, or just a week or so ago. And I'm honored to be here. I was honored to be invited here this evening. And I hope I can say a few things that will be relevant. I would like to point out that I am not from Rhodesia, never served in Rhodesia. And just to set the scene in a way, I don't want to talk about myself much, but I'm actually the son of an English coal miner. My dad worked in the pit for 50 years. He was a member of the Coal Miners Union throughout his entire working career from the age of 14. And I lived in what I would call a union house. So you may have pictures of these policemen coming from far shores who are very wealthy and very privileged, but I was a coal miner's son, and I never forget that. I'm very proud of my father. And I'd just like to mention briefly one other policeman who came out with me, or around the same time, and his name was David Mulhall. And for anyone who may have read an article about the accounts from the police point of view of the Belco disturbance, he, 2 years ago, published an account of his experience on the morning of February the 2nd. And I would urge anyone who's interested in hearing from the police side of things to read his story. And it is actually, I run a website for the Bermuda Ex-Police Officers Association, and you could find that account if you're ever interested. Our website is called expobermuda.com, that's EXPO, Bermuda.com, and you can read his account of what happened on the morning of the 2nd of February. And I should just add that he left Bermuda shortly after 1965, and he went on to become, of all things, a history professor in Canada. So he knows how to write, and he knows how to tell the truth. As for myself, I would just like to mention that when I came to Bermuda at first, you just have a little bit of training when you're an experienced policeman. I've been in the police force for 3 years. And then you put out on the street, and you haven't really got a clue what's going on. You don't know anything about this division in the community. You have no idea at all. But the first policeman to take me around the beat and show me the beat in Hamilton happens to be here this evening, and that's Gilmore Simons. And I've never forgotten all the advice that he gave me as we walked around the street for the first few weeks. Now, just getting on, well, before I mention February the 2nd, I just want to mention one thing that has always been etched in my memory. And it's a little incident down in St. George's. And I mention it because, generally speaking, when you come out to Bermuda as a policeman, you really don't know much about the racial divide. In fact, what I knew about the racial divide was I was sports crazy. And I played cricket. And we had a cricket team, we had a football team, we had several other teams. And as I remember, and Buck Woods might correct me if I'm wrong, we were the only cricket team, and we were the only football team in 1964 that was mixed racially. I can't remember a single white person in a black team, and I can't remember a single black person in a white team. But in the police force, we did have a racially mixed sports team. Is that correct? Just about. Almost, okay. What I'm saying is everything seemed fine to me as a young, inexperienced policeman as far as Bermuda was concerned. But then we come 8 months, I just wanted to mention this one incident, I'm sorry. So we go down, I went down to St. George's Hotel one evening, and it was a lovely evening. Brother Otti mentioned nurses and policemen. Well, this was an evening where the police force was going to enter into a competition, a swimming competition with the nurses. I mean, come on. What's wrong with that? So we go down to the St. George's Hotel pool, and everybody who's swimming, except one person, is English or from the UK. And there was one person on our swimming team. His name was Gary Perenchief. You may know him as Takbir Sharif. And he was on our swimming team. And we all arrived at various different times, and we started swimming. We were looking forward to having a good time. Unfortunately, the manager of the St. George's Hotel, or the manager of the swimming pool, came up to one of us and said, "I'm sorry, but you're not allowed to swim in this pool." Would you happen to have any idea who it might have been? Was it me? I don't think so. It was Gary Perenchief. And he just joined the force just before me. I was very friendly with his brother Wayne. And unfortunately, when it first happened, some of us didn't know what the heck was going on. And Gary was, I'm sure, completely humiliated. And he was asked to leave the swimming pool. And it wasn't until maybe 20 minutes, half an hour later, when we're in the middle of our swimming meet, that somebody told us what had gone on. And I am ashamed to this day to say that we finished swimming there, because I know what we should have done. We should have got the heck out of there right there and then. The captain of our team, or the fellow who'd organized this event, that was Flaps Barnett, he said, "Make no mistake about it, we're going to make an official complaint," and that's exactly what happened. And to the best of my knowledge, the hotel had to write a full apology to Gary, and I think they then changed their policy. So we did have some impact. But anyway, we come to the events of February the 2nd. I'm a young PC. I've been here for 8 months. I'd seen the picketing going on for days, and everything was fine. There was no problem at all. People were, as Brother Artie said, everybody was very friendly. We didn't have any problem. But things were changing, sadly. And I think I'm correct in saying that a couple of nights before, there had been an explosion. Somebody had set off some dynamite. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but it certainly did happen. And things were getting very, very volatile indeed. I was down there. Policemen keep a little pocketbook, so you're supposed to write in your pocketbook what happens to you every day. And I wrote in my pocketbook, I arrived at 7:20 that morning. And I can remember seeing that the picketers this particular morning are not slow. They're almost stopped. Nobody was able to get through. So things had changed over a few days, where the picketing before had been very orderly, 16 picketers. There were lots more people, hundreds more people. And I've got one other entry in my pocketbook I do need to mention to you, and that was, I can see some men armed with golf clubs and sticks on the other side of the road. As Andy said, I think they were by or near a wall. These, I must say, were not the picketers. I don't know where they came from, but they certainly were armed, and as far as I was concerned, dangerous. But guess what happened to me? I was due in court at 9:15 in a magistrate's court case, and I got out of there. So everything happened after I left. So I'm not going to be able to give you any other insight into the events of the day, except to say that as young policemen, I think most of us were there. We thought, there's not going to be any trouble. We were aware, some of us were aware, that there'd been some trouble in 1959 on the docks, and that had been a very potentially dangerous incident. But that had passed without any violence whatsoever. And I think that most of us young policemen believed that that was going to be the case again. But tragically, on the 2nd of February, things slowly and steadily got completely out of hand. And I know I've heard some things about February 2nd and the build up to it tonight that we were not aware of then. I've been made aware of most of the things since then. But that morning, we just had no idea. And tragically, Ian Davis, who Andy mentioned, had his skull smashed completely open, and he never really recovered from that. He had to be pensioned out of the police force. I think he was by far the most seriously injured person, and we did actually have 17 policemen injured that morning. I just want, were you one of the 17, Buck? Yeah, there was 17. Just one, and I don't mean to be amusing about it, but it was reported on the BBC that there'd been a riot in Bermuda and that 70 policemen were injured. And the Commissioner of Police, Mr. George Robbins, said, "We'll pay for it. You better call your parents in England and tell them that you're okay," because 70 policemen was about half the police force. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner, but we don't have a telephone at my house. But I had a free call, so I called my local doctor, his son was a friend of mine, and remember we used to do person-to-person calls? And I made a person-to-person call to my mother. And of course, my doctor's wife said, "I'll get her in 20 minutes," and she went and got my mother and brought her down to the place. And I explained to my mother that there'd been a riot. It wasn't 70 policemen injured, it was only 17. My mother was convinced that I was calling her to tell her that I was getting married. Because I told her there's some fabulous young ladies in Bermuda. Anyway, I don't mean to make light of it, but that is what happened the day after February the 2nd. Thank you very much.